Perfect. Thanks.
So
Thanks, Alex. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much for organizing this, first of all, and inviting me to do this little questions and answers session. Yeah, I'm quite excited about today.
I'm really excited to have you, Penny. It's great to have you join us. And something that me and Penny are looking to provide is a special day at Unite Fitness, focusing on a nutrition seminar taken by Penny. And that's something that I'm hoping that, is going to be super useful for a lot of people. And excited to have it on the date. So that'll be happening on the 29th of April, and just want to give it a little shout out now. And that will be at Unite Fitness, which is my small gym space. Penny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I know that a few of you may know me already, but just to say, just for the people who don't know me, that I am a dietitian. My name is Penny, and I have been in the UK for nearly 12 years now, which feels like a really long time, but it has also flown by. So I qualified in Greece, which is where I'm from, and then since then I've been doing kind of lots of little courses, but also a master's degree in eating disorders and weight management here in the UK. I devoted a lot of my career so far in working with clients who suffer from an eating disorder or generally have disordered eating, or they want to improve their relationship with food. But a big part of my work is also working with people who just have different health goals and different health concerns. So it could be in relation to improving their energy levels for sports and activities, their day-to-day life. It could be different stages of life. So women who are trying to conceive or are pregnant or are going through menopause, but also people who may have specific clinical concerns. So trying to improve or prevent getting high cholesterol or high blood pressure, or diabetes, or even things like vegan nutrition, plant-based eating, making sure people are getting the right nutrients. So just this is a bit about what I do in terms of my work. In terms of what I like doing outside work, I suppose I really like salsa dancing. I have joined the salsa scene here in Glasgow, I think it was 2016, and I've really loved it since. So this is one of my big hobbies. And I have two cats. Again, I didn't know that I was going to love cats so much, but I got my first cat 3 years ago, and then I got another one a year later, and I'm really happy with both of them.
Amazing. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. I love that about salsa. What a great
Mm.
thing. Like, oh, it sounds great.
Yeah.
Not something I've tried, but I love that that's something that you do. And
Mm.
yes, I'm also a cat mum. And I love all animals though. They're great. So yeah, thanks for sharing
Lovely.
that about yourself. And you obviously have done so much in your career supporting people with their eating. So I'm going to kick us off with our first question, which is just understanding a little bit more about emotional eating. And I think something that I'll say is that maybe, is it a way that people are using it to comfort themselves? So how can, with emotional eating, how can you just know when to stop and have that awareness?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I suppose the main thing to maybe clarify, first of all, is thinking about how do we define overeating? Because actually, overeating sometimes may be social related. It could be related to just being on holidays or being invited in a friend's house and having that kind of random or occasional overeating. And sometimes it could be emotional overeating, but again, under normal circumstances where we may be celebrating something and we're really happy about an event, or actually because we know that food will basically help us relax a lot of the time. So there is basically a physiological mechanism that it's making emotional eating quite effective. So just to explain that a bit further, so if we are eating food, it generally stimulates that rest and digest response. So it can help us activating that parasympathetic system. It can help us feel quite soothed, comforted, and relaxed. So again, certain foods can activate that a bit more than others, like especially carbohydrate containing foods can help us feel quite soothed. So I suppose to a certain degree, emotional eating can be a bit normal as part of the way we are managing and coping with emotions. Where it becomes more of a concern for people is when we are using that as our only way to cope with emotions. And this is where it can become quite problematic. And also when it becomes quite addictive, maybe, and then we end up overeating to a point where it can affect our quality of life, maybe our health, how we feel afterwards, and if it becomes basically the only coping mechanism. So I suppose some signs that this emotional overeating may be problematic for somebody are if they are becoming really anxious or preoccupied about food most of the time, maybe if they are feeling quite out of control when they're eating, so they're not present at all in the moment. And actually what happens afterwards as well, do they feel really stressed or shameful or guilty because they've overeaten? So this is, or things like eating in secret or feeling quite ashamed about their eating habits, not sharing basically with other people what happens in terms of their eating patterns. So yeah, this is kind of a way to think about it, and suppose if somebody is struggling with these symptoms, I think this is the point where maybe they need to think about additional coping mechanisms, speaking with somebody, kind of thinking about alternatives, because it may be affecting their quality of life.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. It's nice to hear it echoed that it is just a way sometimes to comfort yourself, even if it is in a social setting or if it's because you've had a long day and it's turning on that rest and digest and that relaxation. So again, though, if that's the only coping mechanism, then what other ways can we go into rest and digest? What other ways can we let ourselves calm down? So it's really nice to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, and it's actually maybe very relevant to what you experience perhaps alongside exercise. So exercise is, of course, an excellent way to release anxiety and stress and release endorphins. But actually, if this is the only coping mechanism for somebody and they're becoming really dependent on that, then again, it can become sometimes problematic if they're not having any other ways to cope. It becomes really excessive. So it's, in a way, it can be something a little bit similar.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so true, and something I can even say that I think was a way that I coped with ways I felt before. I just wanted to do more and more and more all the time, but understanding that not always more is better. And it's just comes down to balance with everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So the second question that we had in was accepting a sweet tooth. So I think there's always that kind of, oh, eating good, I've eaten so good this week, or oh, I had a cake today, was I really that good? Or, I've just got a sweet tooth. And what's right? Do I just go for fruit all day, or should I just accept that I'm going to have like one piece of whatever?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And I suppose thinking about what accepting sweet tooth means is, I suppose we're accepting that food is not just fuel. So it's not just about meeting our nutritional requirements and having a good balance of nutrients. Eating food is also about satisfying our personal taste preferences. It's about enjoyment. It's about that kind of soothing and relaxation and comforting that we talked about before. It's about connecting with other people. So if we are truly accepting that, I suppose we're accepting that food is not just about that physiological need. It's also about satisfaction, like psychological one, and actually it covers so many layers of our lives, isn't it? So something that I'm hearing a lot from different clients is about how they talk to themselves sometimes when they are eating certain foods, especially those sweet maybe foods like chocolate or cake or sweets, and what kind of narratives they carry, what kind of rules maybe they work with, and how do they feel when they eat certain foods that especially they deem maybe they label them as unhealthy or bad. So I suppose thinking about if we are having a lot of really strict rules, we are always going to feel like we are breaking those when we are having something sweet, especially if we're labeling it as really bad, and we will feel like we're doing something wrong. So sometimes that can really then throw people into that kind of really black and white mindset of, okay, now I've started eating something, I might as well eat a lot, because actually this is probably my only opportunity in the week or in the couple of weeks that are going to come, because I'm not going to let myself do this again. So it's kind of that can lead to overeating, especially when we're having that kind of approach with certain foods. So what I would be recommending is thinking about reframing that a little bit, and thinking about that every food can basically be eaten in moderation. So even the sweet ones, the ones that are higher in sugar, higher in saturated fats, because actually even if we eat those on a daily basis, but we are following a well-balanced diet around that, they're still having a really good place in our diet. And there is nothing to be guilty about. There is nothing wrong about these foods.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good to hear. I think that there's definitely still an idea of like an all or nothing mindset, or a, you know, you must be a kind of certain way, or just a stigma around, I think there's a big stigma around processed food, and kind of like conversations about like how it can affect your, just your system in general, like whether kind of like coffee like is too much, really putting like a big edge on you, you're going to have a big downer, is the same way that as sugar, having too excessive amounts of it going to make you feel sleepy. But again, about that narrative, you say to yourself, you're like, yeah, I ate a lot of cake, who cares? Or, oh my goodness, I ate a lot of cake, that means that, you know, I need to go and exercise a lot, or that means that I failed, or I'm just never on the diet, I'm always on or off, like not finding like a balanced approach.
Yeah, and creating that vicious cycle essentially, because when we feel so bad about an eating behavior, we end up probably being lower in mood and feeling quite depressed about it. So the main way, I suppose, maybe if somebody already has that impaired relationship with food, they may end up then overeating or emotionally eat to be able to manage that negative emotion, which again finishes that cycle and makes them again feel quite guilty, perhaps quite bad about what they've done, and then a lot of the times start maybe with a new rule that they follow, you know, around dieting or restriction, that again creates that vicious cycle about craving that food or thinking about that food a lot more. But it's no wonder that we're all very confused, you know, around what types of foods to eat, what not to eat. We have a lot of different messages that come from the media, from different organizations. So it can be really confusing, especially when these foods, as you say, those processed foods or ultra processed foods are really demonized. And obviously people may feel quite bad about including them in their diet, when actually they can have a perfectly okay place within a balanced diet, and we can include them just in moderation, as with everything.
Yeah, that's good. It's nice to hear, just to hear your view on that. And then I suppose that goes into like the next question that we had, that was having a menstrual cycle and how that can impact your cravings. Like I think a lot of people I hear say, you know, 2 weeks of the month, I'm good, I feel fresh, that's great. And then the other 2 weeks I start to feel a bit more crabby, or that week before, the few days before, or again, I suppose it comes down to acceptance, but is there like that need to, what is that thing about cravings before your cycle or around your cycle?
Yeah, and I think you very beautifully kind of described that the different phases around the menstrual cycle. So we have, maybe it's worth explaining that for the sake of our viewers, that we have these two, I suppose it's split between these two phases, the follicular phase, that is the first 14 days, if somebody has, assuming that somebody has like a 28-day cycle. Then we have ovulation, and then we have the luteal phase, which is basically those 2 weeks you've referred on, Alex, about, you know, before somebody's period. So I think, I know we have, at the moment, we only have female viewers today, so I think we've all basically probably very likely had some sort of premenstrual symptoms if we have a menstrual cycle. If we have premenstrual symptoms, and again, an example of those would be things like cravings or bloating or fluid retention, breast tenderness, all of these things could be these symptoms. If these symptoms are really impacting on our quality of life, this is when we would define it as PMS or premenstrual syndrome. So this is when it becomes quite a concern, and we really want to see how to manage that. But a lot of us may have premenstrual symptoms that are still impacting on quality of life at times, and we really want to find ways to manage those, as you say, especially the cravings, and especially cravings for carbohydrate foods or sweet foods as well. So just to explain what happens, I suppose, during these 14 days, we have a lot of hormonal changes that go on. So hormones like progesterone and estrogen will rise during this luteal phase, those last 14 days before of our cycle, which also means that there's a lot of different things that are happening, but some of them are that our metabolism is actually slightly increasing. One of the things that happen is that our core temperature rises, and that can actually increase our calorie requirements. So there's not a defined number, but it could be an average between 150 calories to 300 calories per day. So our body being so clever and wanting to adapt, obviously, to what's happening, it will increase hunger as a result and increase appetite. So some of that, some of those increased cravings are a result of that need for our body. It may actually need more calories on those days, and maybe this is why we're having these stronger cravings. Some other things that may be happening, and again, some of these may be more profound for women who have PCOS or endometriosis, so they may be experiencing those a bit more intensely, is the sensitivity of our body to insulin. So that means insulin is basically responsible for transporting our glucose, the carbohydrates that we eat from the food, transporting it into our body cells. So if our body is not able to use insulin as efficiently, it means that we are not going to feel that impact of higher energy or feeling the effect of the food as quickly, or we may have really quick rises in our blood glucose and then quick drops. So that can effectively make us crave food a lot more, or make us want to eat a lot more food, because we haven't actually experienced the energy. We haven't really absorbed the energy properly from the food we have eaten. So loads of different reasons, I suppose, that may be contributing to these cravings. A few things that may be helpful to keep in mind, apart from the fact that actually accepting that this is normal and the fact that maybe we need a bit more food, is what types of foods would be quite helpful to maybe help with those blood glucose swings, those mood swings that we experience. So a lot of women say that they crave things like carbohydrates or high carbohydrate, high fat foods, and there is quite a good reason for that, because they do tend to help increasing serotonin production and dopamine, so they can actually make people feel better. So what we may want to think about, though, is that any carbohydrate containing food can achieve that. So it doesn't need to be like chocolate or biscuits, which are going to probably increase our blood glucose quite quickly. If we eat maybe a food that is higher fiber, so maybe something like a whole grain bread with some peanut butter and banana, or some yogurt and some maybe muesli with fruits, or even something savory like oat cakes and hummus. So all of these foods that are quite high in basically high fiber, high protein, high and lower sugar, they can really help in managing cravings throughout the day. So using those foods as a way to combat cravings can be quite helpful. There is obviously a lot of layers to that. It's a topic that I could probably talk about for a little while, but this is just an example of how we can use foods to manage cravings.
I think that was so helpful. It's obvious your passion is there when you're talking about everything that you are. And it's nice to hear that, yes, actually using higher fiber foods or more whole grain foods, and just allowing yourself to have that additional carbohydrates without, again, any shame or guilt. And hearing again that like high fat, even if for example, like some high fats that I know I always crave more of is avocado, and dark chocolate, or like nuts or nut butter with like banana on toast, like every what you just said. Or for me, it'll be like full fat yogurt, berries, nuts, and dark chocolate. So really high calorie foods that someone might be really frightened of when they looked at the calories, but actually it's a normal response.
Exactly, and it's not just about the calories, is it? It's about the nutritional quality and what these we need calories in our body to survive and thrive, and use our body is going to use them quite effectively. So sometimes it's important to look at the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals that we will get also from those foods. But yeah, these are all really good examples you've mentioned there, like the avocados or the nuts as well, veggies. You know, they could be really good for that. So absolutely.
Yeah, it's good to hear that. We have done quite well with time, so I don't know if we can have a short conversation on intermittent fasting. My only knowledge of it really is that, or my idea is that you give your body some time to rest and digest and relax and not consume all the time. And that window that ever, if I suggest, is sometimes just giving yourself a 12-hour window. If someone, for example, feels like they're up late at night, they're eating their dinner late, and then they're waking up at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and going again, then sometimes I say maybe you can give yourself 12 hours and just see if that lets you feel a bit better again. But I know sometimes this spreads to a 16-hour window, with people skipping breakfast, or the 5-2 diet, which is totally restricted calories on 2 days, and then a larger amount of calories on the following 5. So that's the kind of intermittent fastings that are kind of circulating that I know of myself. Do you have anything to say on intermittent fasting?
Yeah, so it's such a popular term nowadays, and actually not even just nowadays. I think it has become more popular the last few years as a method, mainly a method of weight loss. That a lot of even in the NHS, it has been used as obviously for people living with diabetes or obesity, kind of as a method for reducing lipid markers, kind of helping them with different health conditions. So there are certainly a lot of studies that show the benefits of intermittent fasting. So we know that it can help with, as you said, actually, Alex, things like the rest of the gut. So it can help with supporting that kind of natural cleansing of the gut. If it's like we're talking about 12 or 16 hours, we can help with things like inflammation, or so conditions like multiple sclerosis, or arthritis. So there is some evidence around that. Even things like better thinking and better memory, better concentration for people, but also as a method basically to improve, reduce kind of heart disease risk, so reducing triglycerides, cholesterol, blood pressure, and obviously weight loss as well. It is quite complex because we know all of the effects of intermittent fasting. The thing is that we only have the short-term effects. So we know that there is that weight loss effect that a lot of people are choosing intermittent fasting for, but we only have data mainly for about 1 year of follow-up for this method of weight loss. So a lot of the times, if we follow people up several years later, we may see that they are reversing that weight loss, or we may see actually that the effect of intermittent fasting versus other calorie deficit diets is actually exactly the same, which can tell us a lot of things. So I suppose one of them is that it really depends on your eating habits, on what are your current requirements as an individual. So what is your lifestyle like? What is your work routine like? If we take as an example somebody who is maybe struggling a lot with eating at nighttime, and even if they've eaten maybe their meals and snacks during the day, but they end up snacking a lot at night, maybe that intermittent fasting pattern may help them have a bit of a framework there, and stop eating at a certain time. And that may have benefits not only on weight loss, for example, if this is their goal, but also things like sleeping. Maybe they're struggling with reflux, when they're sleeping, when they're going to bed, or their sleeping pattern is affected. So that can obviously have that benefit. I think you mentioned a few types of intermittent fasting. So in terms of the actual definition, we have that 16-8, so 8 hours of eating or 16 hours of fasting. And then we also have the 5-2, so 2 days of 500 or 600 calories a day, alternated by those 5 days that are basically what is considered as an adequate diet. So something between like 1,800 calories to 2,500 calories, which is, again, I don't like talking about calories, as I know that there's just so variable for people. There is also another way of just alternating days of eating that calorie restricted diet versus alternated by the adequate kind of what your body actually needs, on basically switching the days apart. So I think these are I suppose the main kind of benefits that have been found. As I said, not long lasting, and I think I am personally very in favor of having quite a detailed conversation with somebody if they are wanting to follow this kind of diet, because I suppose we don't know people's background when a health professional is recommending intermittent fasting. We don't know what is somebody's weight history like, what is their dieting history like. For example, if somebody's having a history or currently recovering from an eating disorder, this can be extremely harmful, and in fact it can increase cravings. It can further disrupt their hunger and fullness signals. It can have a lot of negative actually side effects. It can again create more dietary rules, more sense of restriction, deprivation. So it may not be the right approach for those people. In fact, it's not really within exclusion criteria. So having a really careful history taking and collect information gathering and making sure that we're making a really careful decision, and definitely recognizing that this is not something that has been studied to follow forever. So we're not really supposed to follow this kind of dietary patterns for a really long time, especially since we don't know what happens in our body. There's no studies that say this is something that is okay for our body to follow.
I think that was really helpful and really well summed up and talked about in all ways. And I think it's really good to take that away, that I don't know who is an average Joe, but if the average Joe or Josephine was to, do an intermittent fasting cycle, maybe with no other stresses in their life, and because this was the first time they maybe had struggled with their weight or a health concern, maybe it would work for them, and there's evidence to suggest that. But anyone with any kind of disordered eating patterns previously, even if that was just choosing different diets, for example, for one time being vegan, one time not, trying to follow anything like that, then going to that kind of routine or restricted eating might actually kind of pull up some bad past patterns, if that's what way to put it. But yeah, that was excellent. I'll say that was a lot of food for thought. I've been dying to say that. But so yeah, I'd like to kind of close there, and just say a massive thanks, Penny, for taking your time tonight, preparing the questions as well, because I sent you those previously from some that I had asked a few of my clients what they had thought or what they would like to ask. So I really appreciate your time on that, and would just like to shout out again that you're going to be doing a little Nutreat seminar on the 29th of April, with more of a specific topic that will be concluded. So thank you so much, Penny. Have you got anything you'd like to add before we finish the call tonight?
No, just to say thanks as well. Really, it was really nice to do this with you, Alex, and thank you for inviting me. It was a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to see more people on the 29th of April, and actually having more of a face-to-face seminar with. And I think you mentioned, I think there's going to be some tea and some fruit provided, and maybe a little just grounding session to begin with, maybe a little movement, like gentle movement part. So yeah, I really look forward for that.
Excellent. Oh, that's so good to hear. I've just seen someone put in the chat, excellent, thank you so much, Penny. So that's great to hear. If anyone on this call as well wants more details or has any further questions, then please just ping me, myself or Penny a message, and we'll take our time to get back to you when we can on that. So I'll end the session tonight. Thank you so much again, Penny, and thank you all to those who showed up. Rowan is saying, so interesting. Thank you so much, Penny. So yes, thank you again. I'll just let everyone log off, and very interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Great. Bye, team. See you later.
Bye.